calm down.
You're not listening to me. There are crazy people in this house trying to fucking kill me.
Well, all right. Let me tell you this. You don't exactly seem like you playing with a full deck yourself, all right?
Are you kidding me?
Nope, he's probably not kidding you at all, because everyone in this game does appear to be out to kill you, and your character appears to be a couple of sandwiches short of a picnic himself. So, after my first contact analysis, this is the full in-depth analysis of possibly one of the greatest games I've had to cover multiple versions of. Bearing in mind there's 2 VR modes, multiple PC configurations, an Xbox One version, and also a PS4 and PS4 Pro version. I've just stuck to the Xbox One S here, not the Xbox One. I have split this into 2 videos, one which covers the PC and console versions right here, and therefore another VR mode between the 2 PS4 and the PS4 Pro versions of the same headset, which you can check out the link below and on screen once it is ready later today. So without further ado, let's dive straight in. This is a very visually comparable title across all formats, and that includes the PC with it being maxed out. And this is probably down to the fact that the game was designed with a PS4 in mind from the get-go, with it being a lead platform, and therefore everything else has been scaled on top of that, using that console's hardware as a baseline. All being powered by Capcom's very own brand new RE engine, which will be, I would imagine, a replacement of the Panther 8 engine, which is possibly dead, and this is what they're going to use moving forward, aside from Unreal Engine 4 titles like Street Fighter 6. But the PC does have a few additional options and tweaks that enhance the visual quality, which I'll touch on in the rest of this video, including performance, which will be at the end. So, kicking things off, let's look at resolution, and we'll start with the base, and that is the Xbox One. The Xbox One S version here. Now, like the demo as I covered, this suffers greatly from IQ issues with all other versions. I wasn't aware what it was called, but I did pick up the interlace mode method on the Xbox One at the time. But there was certainly something going on with a reconstruction and a half width and height at certain rare points in the demo. I must stress I didn't get any of those points here. So we're looking at a half width 960 by 1080 resolution on the Xbox One. That's right, this is exactly the same as what I covered at the demo, and this is the interlace mode that is available on the PC. Now this doesn't mean that the game is actually rendering half the resolution, therefore it's just as simple as that. It's doing some reconstruction method in there with the temporal AA, and it does improve the image quality if you stand still, but you can definitely see it when you move because there's no information from the previous pixel. Now this is not field rendering like you would know it for standard interlace. This is basically the same solution that Guerrilla Games used on Shadowfall. Now this means that you get half the pixels across the width, and then it upscales them or brings them back in with the temporal AA. The Xbox One version does run a temporal anti-aliasing solution, but the coverage isn't as consistent as other versions, possibly using less taps than other versions and not quite as consistent as setting FXAA and TAA on the PC. Also, it's working with much less here, which means it's always going to be worse because it's got less information to work with. Temporal AA always works best the more accumulation you have and the more pixel data you have to work with. All this culminates in a far worse image quality on the Xbox One than any other version, and that's visible across texture quality and geometry alike, and you can see it throughout the game when you're playing. It's much softer, far more noisy. Like I say, it does have the TAA, which you can see on screen. A good example of the cost of this is the geometry of Mia's hair here. That said, in fact, I think the PS4 and the Pro actually have slightly better anti-aliasing solutions than even the PC at this point, so there may be some bespoke options being used there that aren't available on the other machines due to the hardware and the API functions, but it does certainly look slightly cleaner. And this is tested with the similar, or at least the same resolution quality on the Pro, which I'll touch on at the end of the video. So moving on to the PS4, that game doesn't run the interlace method, and that runs a full 1920 by 1080 just like the demo, and there's no points in the game where I'm finding spots where that appears to not be true. So we are looking at a deficit here on the Xbox One of around half the width overall, which doesn't sound that good, but bearing in mind this method isn't actually giving back all of that. You have got some accumulation and work there to try and reconstruct the image. So for my tests on PC, it's around 30% benefit. You need it on something like the 750 Ti to get anywhere near 60 FPS, so it's understandable that that has been used here. Overall, the image quality on PC and all the functions you can see on screen to get as near as damn it matches to the Xbox One and the PS4. Outside the resolution difference, there is no difference at all in visual quality. That comes down to shadow maps, drawing distance, and the shadow quality, which you can see examples on screen. You're running high shadows on the consoles, and you can go to very high on the PC, but you need a much bigger card than my 3.5 gig 970 here because it causes huge performance issues, dropping it down to below 30. On top of this, the screen space reflections are on variable, not on, which again means everything is reflected everywhere, and it's a massive GPU hit, so you need to run the variable option, and it works reasonably well. They all appear in all the right places on consoles, with the on method on PC really pushing this up to everything reflecting everything else, which is nice because you get the colour and the bounce like a global illumination pass, but it is quite intensive and not recommended unless you've got a fast GPU. You can see here as I highlight the reflections, there's more on the bonnet, and obviously the colour from the grille is actually reflected back, which is missing when you turn it on variable, the same as console. And the other thing is the motion blur. You can see this per object and camera. As I move here on the PC, you don't get it on consoles. And some nice touches in the game. You get some nice caustic reflections in the water sections of your torch, bouncing off the walls, and this covers all versions, and it's not something you can turn off on any version at all on PC, so it's just a simple light map. But again, it's nice touches and a nice effects in the game with the water effect bouncing up and reflecting off the walls and areas. Everything else, like I say, is a pretty much like for like match across the versions. You can see some examples on the screen as I compare them. So where does PC take you over and beyond that? Now, the PS4 Pro, just quickly mention, is identical to this. I have found no difference at all between the visual quality on the Pro and the standard PS4, and this comes down to even things like screen space reflections, which are the same variable level, shadows are the same high level, so everything else, draw distance is the same, nothing seems to be different at all from all my tests. So the PC can then boost above this, which gives you HBAO+. Again, not really right for the 970, it's quite a big hit. You can punch shadow quality up slightly higher, but it's really hard to notice the difference. Motion blur, which you can run, and that is much better because you haven't got the per object motion blur on consoles. You've just got a pretty poor merge frame blending technique, which looks a bit rough at certain points. I would definitely prefer the motion blur, and that's a sad omission, but it is a 60 FPS title. I'm quite surprised the Pro version didn't have that pushed in either. Now everything else is quite minor. HBAO+ does add much better shadow quality and ambient occlusion like corners and shelves, but it's not really a showstopper, and the draw distance and everything else is pretty much the same on the PC as it is on console. Like I say, it was a console title first and foremost, ported to PC, and it is a reasonably good port. Now you can push a little further on things like performance. If you have the hardware, then you can push beyond 60 FPS, but really it's a 60 FPS title as a target, and it handles that quite well across all formats bar one. I will be covering the PC and budget releases in more detailed analysis and obviously the performance levels, but if you do go max this game out like many games, you are going to end up with performance issues like you see on screen, sub 30 on this machine, so this is expected. Don't go thinking it's a bad port just because you can't max it out and run it at 60 frames per second. If you stick it at the same settings as console with the addition of the motion blur being turned on and everything else the same, then you get a title that pretty much holds on to that same 60 FPS very easily at a full 1080. And if you run it at what has been confirmed by the developer according to Digital Foundry on NeoGAF, it's running the same 2240 by 1260 resolution, which is there in the menu option of PC. So testing that here on my GTX 970 and i5 4690K, we end up with a title that nearly holds on to a locked 60, but just has a couple of dips in the game. Now these probably aren't massively GPU issues, they may be in this section here, but as you play the game on PC, no matter which version, you do get occasional stutters of loading or streaming. This is very minor, but it can definitely be noticed when you're hitching and playing the game. You don't get this on the PS4 or the Pro. The Xbox One version sadly doesn't fall into the same category. So you can see on screen a performance comparison between them. We've already covered the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. They are locked 60 by and large across the game. There's a couple of dips on the PS4, very similar to what we're seeing here on the GTX 970, but realistically it's a locked 60 with no issues at all on that format. The Pro has none at all. No matter what you do, and I've played this game to completion, it has no issues at all with performance, and the PC version has a couple of dips like I say, but I'm sure patches will come to fix these small hangs, but it's certainly nowhere near a level to get up in arms about, but it would be nice to have a fully smooth game. And I'm testing and talking about the UWP store version here. I know, shock! So performance-wise, everything seems pretty even, except again for the Xbox One, which struggles to actually hold on to a locked 60 throughout play. If you're walking through quieter areas, you can get dips down into the 40s. These tend to be when you walk into areas with lots of lighting and shadow maps, so a GPU load issue, because the GPU is really being stressed here on a title that's pushing this high 16 millisecond frame rate. It's certainly a title that's GPU bound and not CPU bound. And this transpires into the comparison here in the fight scene. One of the small minor spoiler sections I'm showing you here, there is only a few, I've tried to keep them very minimal. You can see the fact that the Xbox One really struggles to hold on to a locked 60, dipping down to lows of 45 in this fight scene, whereas you only get a couple of dips on the PS4 in the same, and absolutely nothing at all on the PS4 Pro. And again, the GTX 970 is very close, with only about 3 dips in the whole fight scene, at the same visual settings as what the developers has told us on the PS4 Pro, which is the 2240 by 1260. I still get the same counts I got before, so something else is going on the visual quality here. The temporal reconstruction method that they're using, the TAA, must be improving the quality, and it's certainly improving it very quickly, because it's hard to get any of the counts that they're giving us upside a couple of points when you catch a frame just as it moves. So I'm sure the accumulation buffer here on the TAA must be improving the quality, just like I surmised when I covered the demo at the time. So they certainly seem to be improving that image quality there, and when you play the PC on exactly the same visual quality, again, it doesn't quite look as clean and shimmer free as it does on the PS4 Pro, but this may also come down, like I say, the TAA solution, and this is probably the reason why we're getting the counts we do. But like I said when I covered my first contact, this is a very tough game to count. The post-AA solution in the game, the temporal anti-aliasing solution, and everything else that muddies the screen along with that chromatic aberration does make it very hard to get clean, straight edges to count. But like I say, visually, it's a very close affair across all formats. The Xbox One certainly is the worst version here. Visually, it suffers quite a lot at certain points. Even in a dark game like this, you can see the image quality is lower and the text quality is reduced for it, and the performance is also lower as well. But none of this distracts from a game that is incredibly impressive. Targeting this kind of frame rate on this hardware, it incorporates everything of modern engines. Global illumination, bounces, subsurface scattering, a great lighting model across the board. Animation is really high, motion captured with subtle movements in faces, Havoc physics engine on objects and bodies. With the gore in the game, you certainly get to see how that plays out. And it pushes more with HDR across the board on PC, PS4, PS4 Pro and the Xbox One S. Using the sRGB code in there, you can actually get really good HDR, and it does enhance the look of the game. Basically not standing out with lots of brights, but the dark areas of the game, it does highlight the detail in there that's lost a lot of the times when you set your TV up. So it's certainly worth trying HDR on this. I do recommend it. If not one to show off to your friends, it certainly improves the image quality. If you take a game like Until Dawn, which was also horror themed and very dark, the low quality bitrate in the dark areas there really stood out and actually ruined some of the image quality. None of that really affects the quality here on the standard version, but if you have got HDR, and basically we're only talking about the base Xbox One, unfortunately it doesn't have it, then this really supports it across the board, and all of them are equally as good and equally as impressive. Anyway, that's it. If you enjoyed this or anything else that I've put together, then please feel free to subscribe and share where appropriate. Leave all your thoughts and your feedback below, or on Twitter, where you can also follow me and contact me with your questions and queries. And if you are going to play it, don't play it alone in the dark. I'll see you on the next one.
Where do you think you're going?